starting with the quarterbacks and the risers.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is up to QB4. Again, because of the matchup against the Raiders. I had him in my top 8 last week, so he moves up a little bit. Love him in this matchup against Las Vegas. Baker Mayfield, QB6 after a near 19-point game last week. Great matchup against Carolina. And that's a revenge game, too. He was on the Panthers for about 2 seconds.
Well,
And then
true.
Anthony Richardson, QB13 against the Patriots. I love the matchup. And the Patriots have been giving it up to quarterbacks. Last couple of weeks, Matthew Stafford, Tua Tagovailoa, 8 touchdown passes combined. So I do like Richardson as a low QB1, high QB2 this week.
Yeah, and just for perspective, remember last week, we kind of saw last week coming. Not to the degree that it came, like it was bad last week, but it was the Lions last week. So if we're looking at Anthony Richardson as potentially a matchup-based starter, that was not the matchup that we were interested in starting him, though I understand if some of you did. Certainly if you were projected to lose and you needed a big week by somebody and to take a swing, didn't work out. This week it might. I think that's a good point that you make there. Who's falling?
Kirk Cousins has got the lightning bolts this week, QB21. I don't love that matchup against LA. Although, there are games that go rogue. And, Chargers, Falcons just seems like it's going to be a high-scoring game, but I think it's going to be a Bijan game more than it will be a Cousins game. Tua in the cold. It's supposed to be wicked cold there at Lambeau, and we know that Tua in the cold does not perform well. Just look at last year in Kansas City. And in that same game, Jordan Love, I have QB14. I had him in my top 12 last week. Miami's defense is good against quarterbacks, and they're going to really need to step up their game if they're going to stay in the game with Green Bay. They are fighting for potentially a wild card spot after a bad start with the quarterback situation being what it is. But I don't think Jordan Love is a locked-in fantasy starter this week with no teams on buys.
Going back to Kirk Cousins, he has not been good in the last month or so. It's been rough. I don't have his specific ranking in terms of fantasy points per game right in front of me, but I do have this because I was making notes about CJ Stroud, who has a very good matchup against the Jaguars. And we know we love playing the Jaguars. CJ Stroud has ranked 29th in points per game in the last 4 weeks.
You want to take a guess at what Cousins is for the year on a points per game basis?
Well, hold on. Let me finish my point here for the last 4 weeks. And the reason that I brought up CJ Stroud, in addition to that just being fascinating, the people who have ranked lower than that, the only ones, are Bryce Young, Kirk Cousins, Gardner Minshew, and the backups. Rush, Mac Jones, DeVito. That's crazy. That's the company he is in. CJ Stroud, it's crazier, but
on a points per game basis, he is the QB 23 on the year.
Cousins is.
Yes. Yep.
What's CJ Stroud, by the way, on the year? Because that can't be a whole lot better. Oh my God, it's worse.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what to do with CJ.
Yep. He's got the Jaguars this week, and if memory serves, he had a good game against the Jaguars. So I get it. I know. Well, but here's the thing, Lindsay. You don't have any teams off this week. What's your other option? You don't have another option at quarterback than Stroud?
No, I'm saying you do, and that's why it's a tough decision. What are you going to, because he has a great matchup. Can he take advantage of that? Is this where we are with CJ Stroud? Is that he's playing the Jaguars, but we're still nah, I'm going to play someone else. Is that really where we are with CJ Stroud, that we're not going to play him against the Jaguars?
Again, if this were a different week and there were buys, then I would feel you're probably going to have to play him. But when you have a full slate, it's easier to bench him. But I would say this: if I have Tua and I have CJ, I'm playing CJ this week. So there are some quarterbacks out there, certainly, that if I have Justin Herbert and CJ, obviously I'm playing Justin Herbert. It really depends on if I have Baker Mayfield and CJ, I'm playing Baker Mayfield. There are going to be people out there because of the matchup that will start them.
Let's go to the running backs and the risers this week.
Rico Dowdle, in the top 30 at running back. Matchup's really good against the Giants. Flex starter value. Obviously, Gus Edwards up in the top 30 at RB29 against Atlanta with no J.K. Dobbins. And then Jeremy McNichols is my RB30 this week, which means he is a flex starter. Those people who may be hurting at running back could potentially use him in that role. We assume that Austin Eckler will not play this week. Brian Robinson's a question mark at best. It's a revenge game for Jeremy McNichols. So, he has moved up And those are the guys who have moved up the most because two of those guys were not even on the radar last week.
How about in the other direction? Who's falling?
Yeah, Javonte Williams. I mean, geez Louise.
What?
Yeah, our RB35. I may as well just put Broncos running backs. Like, not even just signal out Javonte.
True.
Just Broncos running backs. Like, I don't want them. DeAndre Swift is also a faller. Bad game last week, which was somewhat predictable. RB28 this week against Detroit, and they're just very good run defense. Yeah. And then Najee Harris. Look at Najee Harris's numbers in the last 3 weeks. The volume is there. The fantasy production is not. And I think a lot of it has to do with Jaylen Warren being back. I have him at the RB26, and not for nothing, the Bengals defense is actually tough against running backs this season.
How about wide receivers?
A couple of these guys are pretty obvious, right? I mean, Courtland Sutton now, he's my wide receiver 11. He's been just bananas good, and this week they've got the Browns on Monday night. Jackson Smith-Njigba now at wide receiver 13. To me, the best wide receiver in Seattle right now. And I've got T. Higgins at wide receiver 16 against Pittsburgh. Remember, before the bye, he had a very good game. I think the Bengals are probably going to be throwing the ball a bunch against Pittsburgh, so T. Higgins is up in my top 20.
Yeah, his last game against the Chargers. Maybe his
very
team,
good.
Maybe his team next year. Very, very good.
Yeah, you never know. The fallers, there's some big names here, Linz.
Okay.
I had Deebo Samuel at wide receiver 43. I'm kind of done with him. I mean,
yeah, he's been tough, man.
He's done next to nothing. Now, if Brock Purdy's able to start, I'll move him up, but I ain't going to move him up like into the top 30. Let's put it that way.
It's relative.
Jaden Reed, this breaks my heart. Wide receiver 35 against Miami in the cold weather.
Broken heart.
In that same game, I got Tyreek Hill as wide receiver 20. Because if Tua has a bad game, then the wide receivers are probably not going to thrive. Let's just say. I mean, it doesn't mean that somebody can't have 5 for 75 and a touchdown, which in fantasy is pretty good. But boy, Tyreek Hill is just, I mean, we will talk about the biggest bust in fantasy football at the end of the season. Christian McCaffrey is going to be on that list, of course, but Tyreek Hill is going to be on that list prominently too, because even since Tua's come back, he has not been the same guy that we all knew and loved from past seasons. All right, dirtbags, let's talk about other ways to play fantasy football. Do you guys know about PrizePicks? It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks.
You can turn your hot takes into cash. Fabs, listen here to figure out which players have the best matchups of the week. We always talk about guys that we like more or less depending on their matchup. Then take that information and flip on over to PrizePicks. See if you think that those players that we talked about will have more or less than the numbers that they have attached to them. It could be number of catches. It could be number of yards. It could be number of touchdowns. You can do it all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick and easy. And if you have a strong take about a guy that you don't have on your fantasy team, this is the place to put that take to work for you. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code FANTASYDIRT and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FANTASYDIRT on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's like free money, guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Tight ends, Who are the risers?
Taysom Hill, obvious. This is the highest I've had him ranked all year. I have him at tight end 7 against the Rams this week. Jonnu Smith, highest I've had him ranked all season at tight end 8. He was in my top 10 last week, but he's moved up top 12 last week. And then Noah Gray, who had 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games, tight end 24. I mean, he's moved up, but like not significantly, but still he's a guy that, like, I mean, they're playing the Raiders. He's on the radar.
Yeah.
He's on the radar.
He's on the raid.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Well done. The fallers, Pat Freiermuth, even though he had a decent game last week, tight end 20. Kyle Pitts, who's been the Pitts lately, at tight end 19. And Sam Laporta, I just mentioned like the biggest bust in fantasy football. Laporta's right up there too. I've got him at tight end 17 against Chicago in tomorrow's game.